Hello and welcome to the new Mindscape. In this video, I'm going to continue my discussion on symbols to talk about a system of symbols that we call mythology. Symbols separate as well as connect things. So let's take, for example, the ideas of good and bad. Everybody has these kinds of ideas. So through different symbols, we tend to put everything into the categories of either good or its opposite, bad. As we live and advance in our lives, there are things that we consider to bring us happiness, to bring us security and life. So we call them good. And we tend to be attracted to these good things. We tend to be attracted to good, and we identify with it. And we perceive other things to bring pain, danger, and death. So we call those things bad or evil. And we tend to fear them and to be repulsed by them. So from various practical notions about what we should do and avoid in our lives, what we should do that would be good for us and what we should avoid doing or do to avoid what is bad for us, a symbolic system emerges around the notions of good and bad, or of good and evil, which are eventually come to be elevated into an all-encompassing moral, spiritual, and philosophical system. So how do we resolve the relationships between these different categories? Throughout most of human history and cultures, actually these questions haven't been resolved by philosophers, but through mythology. Symbols are crafted into stories that tell us who we are, where we came from, where we're going, who and what exists in the cosmos, and how problems, conflicts, and contradictions can be worked out. These stories are myths. Myths are central to each culture in the world, including our own. So let's think, for example, of the story of the Garden of Eden. In that story, the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, were living blissfully in the garden. They were living with God in total happiness and bliss. God told them not to eat the apple of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the serpent tempted Eve, who then tempted Adam, and they both ate an apple from the tree. They fell into sin, and God ejected them from the Garden of Eden. Now, in this story, there are many binary oppositions and symbolic tensions. So first, for example, the first obvious opposition in the story is between man and women. So, what is the relationship between man and women? What is the power differential between man and women? How are Adam and Eve as man and women portrayed in this story? One common interpretation is that because it was Eve who tempted Adam to eat the apple, the woman is the source of sin. So women in many traditional societies, because of her lower social status, or to justify her lower social status, she's associated with sin. But actually in the story there's also an association with the woman and power, because she's so powerful that she could entice Adam. She's actually in possession of a dangerous power with which she can seduce and overpower the power of man. So the story is actually talking about how do you resolve the power relation between men and women, between the masculine and the feminine, between masculine and feminine powers. Now another aspect, or another binary opposition we see here, is between man and God. The apple is on the tree of divine knowledge, the knowledge of God. There's supposed to be a boundary. man is not supposed to eat the apple on the tree, there was a boundary there between man and God that was transgressed. What's the boundary between human beings and God? What will happen if humans try to take the place of God? So here we can see how the story symbolizes or tries to work out the tensions of the relationship between God and humanity. Another binary opposition we find in the story is between nature and culture. So in the story about the Garden of Eden, our primordial innocence, right? They're living. Adam and Eve are naked in the garden. So in a state where there is no knowledge, no culture, a state of purity. But as soon as they acquire the knowledge from the tree, they start to carve up the world based on good and evil, based on their knowledge. So then they fall into sin, into the world of culture, that gives them suffering. So as I mentioned in an earlier video, we can see this theme coming back again in philosophies of the noble savage and in even many films today, such as the film Avatar. And there's another, there are many, many interpretations. There are endless interpretations of the story of Adam and Eve. And one of them, which is actually close to the framing of this new mindscape that I've been talking about, is the spiritual interpretation of the story, which was offered by Abdu'l-Baha, in which he said that Adam and Eve symbolize the two aspects of the human being. Adam symbolizes our higher nature, the divine spirit of humanity, while Eve symbolizes our lower nature, our body and our ego. The tree represents the knowledge of the material world, which can be used for good or for evil. So, the Garden of Eden represents the divine world of pure spirit and goodness, while the material world combines both light and dark, both good and evil. So once you know the material world, you'll end up falling into the world of good and evil. And the serpent represents attachment to material desires. So according to this interpretation, our lower nature, Eve, was tempted into attachment to the material world and its pleasures, and corrupted our pure spirit, Adam. So the human being, which is actually the combination of Adam and Eve, the combination of body and spirit, fell out of the state of purity, of nearness to God, fell out of the Garden of Eden, and then fell into living in sin, struggling with his attachments to material desires. So, as we can see, there are many possible symbolic interpretations of mythical stories. Symbols have no fixed and closed meanings, so there's no limit to the possible interpretations of stories and myths. If we were to take such stories literally, of course they're absurd. They never happened physically. But if we take them symbolically, they open the imagination to endless possibilities. Mythology uses symbols to work through the conflicts between the binary oppositions at the root of our basic ontologies or mental operating systems. The story of Adam and Eve and so many other myths are certainly very, very ancient, but they're not obsolete. Even now, we still live in a deeply mythological world. Just look at films. Through films, mythology is constantly being produced in our society. So while tribespeople would recount myths while sitting around the fire at night, we follow myths by going to the cinema. Or we perform myths through our political life, through the political theater that we watch and follow and participate in every day.